The origins of the Elymians, who settled in Sicily during the Iron Age, might be a mystery, but what is certain is that these Hellenized people founded several prominent settlements on the island. A few weeks ago, I visited two of these called Erice and Segesta. Most of ancient Erice was built over by subsequent cultures and is still inhabited today, whereas Segesta played a limited role in the lives of later people, which meant much of its classical period remains were preserved. It's now a stunningly beautiful archaeological park with views of the surrounding hillsides and the distant sea. The silent ruins are a world away from the busy city that once existed there. In this video, I explore ancient Segesta. Like many Italian settlements, Segesta was given a Trojan origin by ancient writers. The Athenian historian and general Thucydides wrote, "While Ilium, which means Troy, was being conquered, some Trojans who had already defied the Achaeans reached Sicily on their own ships, and having settled next to the territory of the Sicanians, they were altogether named Elymi, and their cities were Erice, which refers to Erice, and Segesta, which refers to Segesta. Along with them, some of the Phocaeans came to reside, those who, returning from Troy, were forced by a storm, first in Libya and then from here into Sicily." The Roman statesman Cicero said in his series of speeches in the trial against the former governor of Sicily, "Segesta is, O judges, an antique city of Sicily, which, as narrated, was founded by Aeneas when he escaped from Troy and arrived to those places. Thus, the Segestans claim to be a united Roman people, not only by allegiance and eternal friendship, but also by a common descent." There are many other ancient texts which also claim a Trojan origin for Segesta, but in spite of these texts, the archaeological evidence supports an origin on the Italian peninsula. Once in Sicily, as well as founding Erice and Segesta, the Elymians also established the city of Entella and several other smaller towns. Just like their origins, the language of the Elymians is a bit of a mystery. In fact, if either was known with any certainty, then it would help explain the other. Their language has come down to us as inscriptions in pottery and on coins, as well as in a few texts, all written in the Greek alphabet due to Hellenistic influences. This language has still not been conclusively deciphered. However, linguists think it falls into the Indo-European language family. Greek texts refer to Segesta as Segesta without the S, something that appears to have been added by the Romans. It's possible they did this because Segestas means poverty in Latin, so they improved the name by removing any negative connotations that might be associated with it. Segesta is situated on the twin-peaked Mount Barbaro, more than 400 meters above sea level. A river runs around its base that is fed in parts by warm volcanic springs, which is probably one of the reasons its earlier inhabitants were attracted to the area. The earliest dwellings on the mountain slopes were huts, before the Elymians started to hew houses from the rocks and create artificial terraces to connect different areas. One of these early dwellings, known as the Rupestrile House, is preserved at Segesta. Carved at the end of the 6th century, it had 2 rooms, a grain silo and a water tank. During Roman times, another room, an oven and altars were added. There was also probably a second story which didn't survive. As the Elymians became increasingly Hellenized, so did their settlements. As I mentioned in my previous video, The Truth About Sicily's Cyclopean Walls, the temple that the Elymians built in Erice became an extensive and important sanctuary dedicated to the Greek deity Aphrodite. The unfinished temple at Segesta, built in the Doric style sometime in the 5th century BCE, replaced a wooden cult building which had clay tiles. Both buildings were oriented along a west-southwest to east-northeast axis. The very obvious Greek influence on the Elymians is clear from this temple, which looks much as it did back then. It's not known which deity the temple was to be dedicated to, but it's thought its construction came to a sudden halt because of the war with Seliante in the south. The temple was built outside the main city walls on a different hill. It has 14 columns on its longer sides and 4 on each of its ends, and measures 61 by 26 meters. There are several indications that the temple wasn't finished, such as the columns not being fluted. A Doric temple would also be expected to have entrance steps, a peristasis, which means the covered colonnaded corridor around the edge of the temple, a cella, which means the inner chamber of the temple, and a roof. It's interesting that in spite of Hellenization, the Elymians chose their previous court location for the construction of the new temple, and even oriented it in the same direction as their previous building. I'm not sure if this orientation has any meaning in terms of archaeoastronomy, but it certainly means the temple points towards the sea, which appears as a gap in the distant mountains. Because Segesta was settled only intermittently and lightly in subsequent times, there are no modern buildings ruining the view, just some modern highways. The temple itself is isolated, which gives such an amazing impression of how it was at the time it was built. It's a shame it wasn't finished. It's actually about a half-an-hour walk from the amphitheatre and the rest of the city of Segesta, so this only adds to the atmosphere. Half an hour away and much higher up sits the ruins of the ancient city centre, with its amphitheatre, Agora, which became a forum during Roman times, and its fortifications. And Agora was a public meeting place. Quite a lot of the amphitheatre remains, and just as with many classical period theatres in the Mediterranean, it has incredible views. Probably my favourite amphitheatre is the Greek one in Taormina on the east coast of Sicily. It's magical. The ancient theatre designers really knew how to capture the imagination of their audiences. Not much remains of the Agora at Segesta, but based on excavations and comparisons with more intact sites, archaeologists know it was made up of colonnaded buildings centred on a huge square. A bouleuterion, a sort of council building, once existed close by as well, and there's some evidence a gymnasium was there too. Excavations on other parts of the mountain have also found some other interesting buildings, such as ancient houses, another sanctuary known as the Contrada Mango, which was built in the Doric style but on a smaller scale than the unfinished temple, and a necropolis. During the classical era, the whole city of Segesta underwent several periods of reconstruction, so it's likely it had a pretty sizable population and was just as important as ancient authors say it was. Now wandering around the ruins, it's hard to believe it was once buzzing with activity. I've used quite a few open source photographs here, as well as my own, because as you know, if you watched my travel vlog, I turned up at the same time as several tourist buses, so it was hard to even get space on the paths to stop for a moment and take pictures. If I hadn't have been with my mum, I would have waited around until it was less busy, but in those temperatures and at her age, it wasn't good to do that. During my trip to Segesta, I, of course, looked to see if there were any signs that the classical era city was built over megalithic remains such as Cyclopean walls, but I couldn't find anything. The question still remains, why do Sardinia and Malta have so many megalithic remains, but Sicily does not? Sicily is huge, so of course I'll keep looking. Rumours abound of pyramids and megaliths here, there and everywhere, so I'm determined to find something. But what I find interesting is that any ancient civilization connected with high culture, such as the temple people in Malta, the Hellenized Elymians in Sicily, the Etruscans in Italy, and many others, always seem to have mysterious origins, with relatively sophisticated societies just sort of appearing without a clear period of evolution. Where texts exist, they offer contradictory myths and legends, and the archaeological record hardly ever gives us the answers we need. There are also many undeciphered languages and scripts which might hold clues if they can be decoded in the future. I certainly think there's more to myths and legends, but the information that comes from such sources needs to be combined with the archaeological record and new advanced DNA studies to figure out how the ancient world was really connected. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit the like button, click on that notification bell so you know when I publish a new episode, and I'll see you next time.